Welcome to Puck Talk CS. I'm Matthew Mugno alongside Steve Murno. Plenty on the docket. New York Rangers, President's Trophy, franchise record in wins. Artemi Panarin, second best single season in franchise history. Steve-O, how we doing coming into the playoffs?
Awesome. Well, howdy, everyone. Based on that sentiment, Chives, I can't be doing any much better. And I'm telling you, this last couple of week was, I don't want to say it was fully stressful. Like, we weren't sitting there like the Capitals, literally begging and waiting to the last second to be in the playoffs. But I'm telling you, when we lost that game to Philly, we lost that game at UBS. I'm telling you, there was like, oh shit, like the Hurricanes are right on our tail, and we cannot lose. It would be a horrible choke to lose the President's Trophy and the division to most likely the Stars and the Hurricanes. Either or, so that would have been terrible, but I'm glad it worked out. I'm doing great, Chav. So listen, let's jump in. We have so much to talk about. Let's talk some puck.
Well, I think first and foremost, let's just go over last week. We saw, like you mentioned, lost to Philadelphia, lost to the Islanders. Now, I was not impressed by the loss to the Islanders because I find the Rangers, when they're in these positions to knock off their rival, knock off an opponent, they haven't. And I think that first game, if they beat the Islanders in that first game, they probably don't make it into the playoffs. That's just, I think, how things would have gone for them. And the reality was the Islanders played with more desperation. And that was frustrating to see, but I think all in all, we'll see another gear for this Rangers team to kick into. It's just a matter of, I wanted to see them play with some more snarl against the Islanders at UBS.
Yeah, and I think the thing that was kind of most disappointing for me is that third period, we were hounding them. We were in the offensive zone the whole period, and we just couldn't get that goal. And the thing that I didn't like, this game didn't really bother me that much. It was the Philadelphia game that I think bothered me more as a fan because I think we lead the league in comeback wins this year. I mean, every single time when the Rangers needed it this year, you saw the backs against the wall. We came back and you saw that rally. You saw the dogs. This game against Philadelphia, there was none of that at all. I mean, there was no momentum whatsoever, and it was just abysmal. It was just one of those games that you wanted to rip your hair out, especially against a team that Philadelphia coming into this game, they were like 1-6. Their goaltending was playing terrible. Their power play was terrible prior to this game, and it just didn't click overall. And I similar to the game against the Islanders, I share the same opinions with you.
Now, let's talk about how things wrapped up. The Rangers win the President's Trophy. They don't get to we don't get to see if they're going to touch it or not. It wasn't in the building. I was hoping it would be there because they were waiting. I believe it was Pittsburgh or Carolina, right? They were waiting on a game for one of those teams. Alas, it comes down to probably the saddest shootout I've ever seen, I think anyone's ever seen. Patrick Kane scores the winner, no celebration. Why? I mean, the fact they tied that game up, 3 seconds left, the night before, Lucas Raymond has probably the best single effort since maybe their Stanley Cup in like 2008. I was blown away with Detroit's resiliency, how they responded. You mentioned back against the wall. They had to play Montreal twice, who was trying to play spoiler. Detroit, man, they showed up, showed out. I was really hoping they would get in for more than one reason. The history. Rangers haven't played them since 1950 Stanley Cup Final. Pete Babando, Game 7 overtime goal. The next time the Rangers are in the Cup Finals, 1972, 22 years later. Like, there's so much history there. Love Detroit. OG6 would have been an unreal jersey matchup. All in all, they lose out. The Flyers give up an empty net goal. They didn't even have to pull their goaltender. And you know what, Steve-O? I want to know your opinion. We talked about why Pittsburgh was out. We then talked about why Pittsburgh could win the friggin' Stanley Cup. And now we're sitting here and they're not even in the playoffs. Did that surprise you that they didn't make it in?
Yeah, it depends because I was on that wave with you. I was too up and down with them, and the truth is that they put themselves in a disadvantage. They were way too far out. They catapulted and jumped in, and they had that last wild card spot. for a second, but they took a huge loss. I think it was to Boston. That was the one that ended their season. That was a tough loss. And Detroit, I'm on the same wavelength as you. Like I'm not saying that I was rooting for them because I'm careful for who I wish for. Because in recent years, whoever I wished for, it didn't pan out. But I
Hmm.
mean, Detroit to come up, and that just goes to show you they were tied with Washington with 91 points, but Washington had the edge. That just goes to show you that every point matters. A game, even a game in November, that's in overtime. You're like, at least we got 1 point. That's why you always go for the win because it's so important. And it is, man, my heart goes out to Detroit fans because that has got to be a real tearjerker. I'm right with you, Chives. That is unfortunate. And Washington was able to come up and they won the big games. You want mention the Philadelphia game, the ending. If anyone saw the ending, that blows my mind. I mean, I can't believe the Flyers allowed that to happen. But they had a big win against Tampa, and a big win against Boston as well. Washington. So they won the big games at the end of the season. They deserve to make the playoffs.
Yeah, we'll be talking plenty about Washington on this pod today, but as you mentioned, coming down the pike, like the Caps really, they just got it together at the exact right time. Like they weren't great, but it was just better than their competition. And I think what's interesting is script writers, the fact that all these teams happen to play each other at the very end of the road was really fun to watch. I don't know if we've had as good of an end to regular season in a very long time.
Yeah, and you got the sense, Detroit, the last few games they were playing, they played Pittsburgh, they came back and they tied it. They were down Montreal, they came back and they tied it. I mean, they were down by like 2, 3 goals every game, and they rallied since. You kind of got the urge that, hold on, this has the opportunity to be a storybook ending, but it
Hmm.
wasn't. And I can say that we were both right. We both predicted 3 weeks ago that the Washington Capitals would be the one to get that the last spot, and we were both right. So for you, my friend, your year has just been fantastic predictions. First started off with Seattle falling off, so I'm glad that we were able to predict that. Hopefully, we could predict the future, but I'm not so keen on that.
I also had the Flames out. I know our buddy Zaretsky had them in. Listen, Steve, I know you usually get the best of us. I'm not a predictions guy, but maybe that's what's saving me. I'm not all about that end result. Yeah, Seattle, they are not in the postseason. I thought Pittsburgh might make it in. They're not in. Neither, by the way, let's also preface a lot of our conversations here on the show were about the Buffalo Sabres, Detroit Red Wings, and Ottawa Senators. One of those teams made the playoffs. In fact, not one of them came close.
It's interesting, Detroit, you knew was going to linger in there. I didn't know that it was going to come down to ultimately 1 point.
Hmm.
Ottawa, you thought was going to be better, but even watching the last game of the regular season, they got some players and dogs on there, but they were
Hmm.
just like completely lopsided. I mean, they look like a high school hockey team when we were playing them, so I'm not surprised. And in Buffalo, I mean, this is an off-season preview. This is quick thoughts to wrap the season, but they just couldn't seem to get over that edge. They just the same way they ended last year, they started and remained consistent this year, and they just couldn't get over that edge. Credit to them though, they finished better than the Devils. I don't know if
And
that
I
means
know,
anything, but
yeah, I mean TNT too, Tage Thompson. Like, I don't know. It's like he's not a sophomore by his age and the amount of time he's been in the league, but it was kind of that sophomore slump. Like he broke out. I felt the same way with J Rob. Like Jason Robertson, I felt like had a little bit of a down year. Same way as Tage Thompson, but Tage is the guy in Buffalo. So I think he kind of got hot too late. I thought like a guy like Alex Tuck played well. A lot of it comes to goaltending. Jonas Corpusalo, from everything I've heard, is like he'll play like Hasek one night and DiPietro another. So listen, I think it came down to that injuries. How many times were the Senators without Josh Norris? They were without Pinto for the gambling suspension. You know, Here and there they have injuries. Chikrin, Kachuk. You just can't succeed that way. They traded their players at the deadline, and I think something to bring back to. I know we're not going to talk much about them going forward. So to touch upon John Tortorella, the Flyers are really making things happen in Philly. I mean, they're really looking into what players are going to be their players, players that they want for potential Stanley Cup playoff runs in the future. And I think everything that Tortorella's done is a huge test. How many times did he sit Bobby Brink, Morgan Frost, and sent them a message? And listen, if they can't handle it, his mantra, his school of thinking is, then they're gone. Then I don't want them here. And he clearly sent the message, and they were within, again, 1 point and an empty net of the postseason. And I think for that matter, you got to give them credit for how far they've come this year. I mean, you and I had them in the basement of the Metro.
That's true, and I think that they have a solid foundation. They got a lot of young players, and this is something they could transition to next year. I'm gonna pop the question over to you. I mean, these are just quick thoughts, like quick raw thoughts now that the season's over. But are we thinking Philadelphia next year? Do you think they could build momentum on this year? Because this year was I'm going to be honest, I thought it was a great year. Minus the last 2 weeks, they would have been in the playoffs. Minus there
Yeah.
again, they did have Carter Hart go down, and that was a killer. But Chives, do you think this is a team that builds momentum next year quickly, or do you think that this was a one-off? What do you think?
Man, that's a good question. I want to say I think they're going to build momentum. And the reason why is because I just think they're going to go in the offseason and they know they need a starting goaltender. And what did I just say with the other three teams? They played Samuel Urson down the stretch. That was not a guy that was ready for that role. And listen, he played it with honor. Have to respect the goaltending. They tried to bring in the Russian kid. It just didn't really work out. I think they were hoping that he'd kind of transition and catch fire quick. Didn't work. How many times are you going to reach in the bag? I think for them next year, they know what assets they want. They know who they want to keep. They know who they want out. And it seems like between Briere, Keith Jones, and John Tortorella, they clearly have the culture they want and the build they want for the team. So, yeah, I think it's going to be something they build off of. What about you, Steve-O?
I'm in the same boat as you. I think that this team and with Torch, you know what you're getting. Obviously, we know better than anybody. You know what he brings to the table, and I think he's proven that he could get the system going up and well. And some of these guys in Philly, they're not used to be playing competitive hockey this time of year. So I'm sure that's not one of the main reasons why they went 1-8 down the stretch. And that's of course one of the reasons why they didn't make the playoffs. But again, you look consistently. I mean, they were consistently third place in the Metro, like for a solid 2 to 3 months. So hats off to them. They only ended up missing the playoffs by 3 points. So overall, pretty successful season for them. I agree. Same boat.
Yeah, and while what we just talked about basically the entire Metro, love that the Devils are not in there. That's great to see for all the hype in the beginning of the year with that top six, with the win last year. Yeah, I think it goes to show you what happens when you have a spoil of riches, an embarrassment of riches. Sometimes it just doesn't line up. Like that's reality, right? Like we saw when Golden State lost to the Toronto Raptors in the NBA Finals. Granted, different league, 5-on-5, right? Same deal though. Listen, they added guys like Durant and DeMarcus Cousins, and they weren't able to get the job done against this single guy. Different sport, same thing. They have that top six, didn't get the job done.
It's a good analogy, though. I like that. That's spot on. And again, their biggest weakness, really, well, they kind of had two, but for me, their biggest need on paper, it's something you can't overcome in this league, and that's their goaltending. You said it on the spot time and again, and we said it when we had our special guests on. Goaltending is their weakness, and they couldn't overcome that. And that's something, hopefully, as we progress here into the playoffs, that it could be a real strength for us. I saw, I don't know who it was the NHL. Somebody posted top goalies in the playoffs, and Igor was number one. I think the NHL had a post on that or something. Maybe it was Bleacher Report rankings. I don't know, but definitely got to be confident with Igor. And then I mentioned two things for the Devils. Obviously, goaltending was number one, and their injuries. They couldn't stay healthy this year, Chaz.
Listen, and that's you draft guys that are built the way they are, and that's something that you're playing with fire with. Now with goaltending, yeah, I mean we mentioned it, and I also want to preface right before we swing here. Yeah, Steve and I think we just mentioned goaltending almost with every team. So if that's not something that when we pivot into all the conversations coming up about the playoffs and we talk about the previews, all those teams have a solid goaltender. Even a team that just made it, well, not just made it, and frankly, they were really good, but the last few years they struggled. Nashville, UC Soros, they were debating trading him. They keep him, and now look at that. They got 40 plus wins out of the year. So every team needs goaltending, and I think it's time, Steve-O, to swing to our guest today, Arthur Staple. It's my honor to have Arthur Staple of The Athletic on. Arthur, how are you doing? I know you cover both the Islanders and Rangers, so I'm sure your head might be spinning with how things have gone lately.
I'm good, man. I'm good, guys. It's nice to be here. I think I've retained a little bit about each team. So mostly the Rangers since I was there most of the year, but it's nice to get to the end of the season finally and get ready for the stuff that matters.
Before we get into that hockey convo, I mean, I know you're a curb guy, so were you like, I can't escape the Artemi Panarin conversation when that came up?
It was funny to see the clip. I haven't gotten too caught up on this season just because the hectic schedule and family stuff and everything like that. But I'm excited to. I think my wife and I have kind of started from like season two. We're just going to go through the whole thing and restart it all. And I do appreciate that. Larry seems like he's a big basketball guy, but it's nice to throw in a little hockey reference every now and again. I think we got a couple from like 30 Rock, all of the big sitcoms of the last few years have managed to work in a Ranger or Islander one. So it's nice to see the Breadman get in there. I don't know if he cares very much, but it was nice to see.
Yeah, I mean, I also know a few years back. I don't. How long have you covered now both teams? A few years, right?
Yeah, I switched over from the Islanders at the Athletic before the 21-22 season, and then kind of ended the Islanders back at the beginning of this season. And Peter Baugh, my colleague from Denver, moved in January, so we've both been kind of doing mostly Rangers since then. And it sure seemed like the Islanders weren't going to make the playoffs, so I wasn't paying too close attention. And then they went on a pretty good run the last month of the year. So it's nice to me, not just because I cover both teams, but I think it's always better when both teams are good for New York sports. You need the rivalry. I know the Devils have kind of been up there, and they eliminated the Rangers last year, but there's nothing like Rangers Islanders. And way back when I was a kid, they seemingly played every year in the playoffs, and then the Islanders would go on and win, or the Rangers would make a good run, and they ended up winning in '94 after they blitzed the Islanders in the first round. So I'm selfishly hoping that they both advance and play in the second round, and we get a little mayhem on the way to the conference final. But it hasn't happened. It hasn't worked out too much over the years.
Speaking about the Rangers and Islanders playing each other, we got treated to two awesome games between the two teams at the end of the season. What stood out to you the most during those last two games for both teams as they enter the postseason?
I think the desperation level was there, which was great to see. I had written something about how few games this late in the year in the regular season since that '94 Rangers run to the finals. There's maybe four or five games that have really mattered to either team, not just both teams. And it's been even 7 or 8 years since that's happened. It always seems like one team's up and the other team's down. They've only both been to the playoffs, I think, in the last 30 postseasons. I think 6 or 7 times. This maybe is 7 times. It's a ridiculous number considering that there's been stretches when they've both been good. It just hasn't been at the same time. So it was nice to see the games that mattered. The one at UBS had really good atmosphere. Obviously, a lot of Ranger fans there. Islanders went out to that big lead early, and you kind of knew the Rangers would make a push. And I think what you're seeing from the Islanders now, and maybe the thing that could propel them against Carolina, is that they're able to absorb a ton of shots and a ton of chances and a ton of pressure, and they're not really getting rattled. They were getting rattled pretty easily earlier in the year, and that's kind of what had them on the playoff cut line. But that part was, seeing kind of like the classic Islanders of the last few years. And I think seeing the Rangers being able to pour it on like that, and even when they were down most of the third period at the Garden the other night, the other day rather, and Panarin scoring that pretty goal off the faceoff to tie it, a good overtime, a good shootout. You kind of got a vision there of if these teams could play in the playoffs, it would be a pretty good matchup. Obviously the Rangers have a lot more firepower, but the Islanders, have some guts. I think they've got a little bit more intestinal fortitude than the Rangers do, because the Rangers are so skilled at a lot of key positions. I think the Islanders, just when they're at their best, they're able to grind you down. They're annoying. They play like pests. They can really get in your face after whistles, and they seem to get a lot of opportunistic goals. That's really what's propelled them. This like 9 1-1 stretch they had to finish the season. Their offense is not high powered by any means, but they seem to be able to score when they need to. And I think those games are always fun. I saw a few comments in that story I did that, Ranger fans saying, "Oh, the Islander fans don't come to the Garden that much," and I've always disagreed with that. There's always a bunch of Islander fans there. I think even with UBS there now, it's still more convenient for some Islander fans to come straight to Penn Station on the railroad and go up and see a game. And it's great. We love to see that. I love to see the Ranger fans at the old Coliseum, at Barclays, at UBS, seeing the Islander fans at the Garden get loud in the years the Islanders were better. It makes it fun around here. And like I said, I really do hope to see these guys meet in the playoffs, because if they can both win around, then, they're playing at their best, and you'll see them best on best. And that'll be, it'll be a real battle.
Did either of these teams, or both, Rangers or Islanders, did they exceed your expectations that you had for them before the season started?
I think definitely the Rangers did. To have a President's Trophy season, it's hard to predict a team to be first overall in the league, no matter what kind of roster they have coming in. You got a new coach, a guy in Peter Laviolette, who has an amazing track record in his first year as a head coach. He's been in a lot of different places, so he's had a lot of opportunities to have first year I think this is his 6th NHL team. But he always seems to get out of the gate really well. It seems like it's a combination of factors. I think he always assembles a really good coaching staff. This one was a little different than he's had in years past. But he's always seemed, that's just a sign of the preparation. I think that the digestible structural things that he wanted to see from them, it's very easy to put into practice. The competitive nature of, kind of internal competitiveness in training camp, not necessarily for roster spots, but just the high end guys competing every day, playing, practicing and playing at a high level right from the start. And I think, that you look at a couple of keys throughout this season. To me, maybe the unsung hero of the year was Jonathan Quick, because he was so good right out of the gate. A guy who, I certainly had written some analytic based pieces about. His numbers were just god awful last year. He was dead last among every goalie who made 2 saves in the league in terms of goals saved above expectation. It was shocking to me that they jumped so quickly to sign him as a backup to a guy in Igor Shesterkin, who did end up getting hurt for a couple of weeks and then needing another break around the All-Star break. So, Igor Shesterkin's not a 60, 65 game guy. So I had a lot of hesitations about what Chris Drury did. And not only did Chris Drury prove me wrong, Jonathan Quick, I think, proved a lot of people wrong with the kind of season he had. And most importantly, he didn't ease into it. He was great from the start. Igor was not great from the start. He needed a little time to get going. And then, like I said, had that injury absence. And he's clearly playing at a high level now. But to me, Jonathan Quick was really sharp. Eric Gustafsson is another one. Filled in really well when Adam Fox was out in November for the whole month with a knee injury. That signing, you don't really see how effective he can be when he's not getting that power play time. But when he was there, I think that's kind of accentuates his skill set. He moves the puck well. He's a veteran guy who's put up points before, and I think he really ate up that power play one time, the extra minutes. And then, you look at a guy like Artemi Panarin, any other season, he's getting tons of Hart Trophy votes. It's tough this year because there's 4 guys that are the clear favorites, and even that, I just did my ballot last night, and you could just close your eyes and throw a dart at a dartboard and pick one of those between Austin Matthews, Connor McDavid, Nikita Kucherov, and Nathan McKinnon. So Panarin's probably going to finish 5th. He might not even be 5th place on some ballots, and it's not a slight against him. It's just the way that this was a big year for superstar players. But he took a big step forward. I think being away from Gerard Gallant, those guys didn't get along very well. That was no secret when Gallant was here. I think he felt a little freer, double shifted a lot by Laviolette. I think he earned the double shifts, much more of an attacking style, and having the consistent line mates with Vincent Trocheck and Alexis Lafreniere, both of whom had excellent years, career years for both of them. That line has really been excellent. And a lot of their other big name guys, Adam Fox, maybe coming back from the injury, took a little bit of time. He's been excellent. Mika Zibanejad took a lot of heat for the 5-on-5 play. He's been good. Chris Kreider, almost another 40-goal season. So when your stars, especially on a star-laden team like the Rangers, when they are showing out from game 1 pretty much to game 82, this is the result. And I don't think a lot of people saw this one coming.
Now, you have to ask about those Hart Trophy players delivering for their teams. It's a pretty loaded playoffs. What teams in the East do you see as the biggest threat to the New York teams?
Carolina, obviously, I think that, where maybe they have the Islanders number because that's not a good mix of styles, where Carolina is just so relentless with funneling pucks to the net, funneling bodies to the net, retrievals. They're just a much faster team, and the Islanders are play at a more deliberate pace, let's say, and that may not work out so well for them over the course of a 7-game series. But when it comes to the Rangers in Carolina, I think it's the opposite. I think the Rangers have Carolina's number. It seems like as Carolina goes through the playoffs, you catch them in the first round, you're probably at a disadvantage. But I think as they go on, their goaltending's not really that proven. Freddie Anderson's been great story coming back from missing so much time with the blood clot issue. But he's not got a great track record of staying healthy in the playoffs. They've got Pyotr Kochetkov, who we've seen in net a couple of years ago in the Rangers-Carolina series, and still a young guy, still relatively unproven. They seem like they have a little bit more firepower now with Jake Gensel. Dmitry Orlov was a great ad for them. Brent Burns, at almost 40 years old, is playing at a high level, and just the system that they play, the relentlessness of it. That is hard to keep up, I think, through 4 playoff series, even 2 or 3 playoff series we've seen with them. So I think if Carolina gets past the Islanders and it's Rangers-Carolina in the second round, that's going to be a tough one for the Rangers, but I still think they have the advantage over them. And when it comes to the teams in the Atlantic, the East has been so strange this year. Boston was obviously at the top of the division for a long time. Florida had a stretch where it looked like they were the best team in the league, I think, this season, and they earned that division win. But them getting past Tampa, that's a team that's going to take a big chunk out of them. And I think if it's Florida-Boston in the second round, that's going to be quite a war. And if the Rangers are able to get out of their division and get to the conference final again, whether either one of those teams, interesting matchups for them. I think Florida, maybe even getting to the finals last year, I still find them to be a little bit unproven in terms of the consistency of their game. They do play with some bite, but I just kind of find their defense, overall team defense and goaltending, still a little bit suspect. And the Bruins, they've been a regular season machine the last 2 years, but I still wonder where they get goals from. They're, down the middle. It's such a mismatch between the Rangers and the Bruins. Their games have been great this season, really for the most part, pretty close results. And the Bruins always work incredibly hard. And if there's a team in the East that has a better 1-2 punch in net than the Rangers, it might be the Bruins with Swayman and Ullmark. But really, when you get to the playoffs, you got to have one guy going really well. And obviously, the Rangers are going to start off with Shesterkin, and he'll be the guy going forward. So I think based on the results and based on the matchups, you have to say the Rangers are the favorite in the East right now. It could change. Maybe that scares a few Ranger fans to think that they are, it's like, but you earned it. President's Trophy. They're the best team in the league. So until further notice, they're the ones that are the team to beat.
Now, Rangers Caps, that's the series round 1. To end of the year, the Rangers in the last week, 5-on-5 play hasn't been great to finish off the year. Do you think that'll be their biggest speed bump here in round 1? What are some other keys to the series that you have?
Steve Valiquette and I talk a lot about, and I'm lucky enough to be able to kind of check his incredible data site every so often. And the thing that he's accentuated, and I'm sure he said it on the air a lot, is defending the rush for the Rangers. It was a problem for them last year. I think it was a problem for them in the playoff series against Jersey. They had plenty of other problems in that series, and it was a very winnable series for them. But I think they have such highly skilled guys, such confident guys offensively, and especially in those top 2 lines, that I think sometimes they get a little pass happy. They get a little Harlem Globetrottery or in the offensive zone, and you make some turnovers and you let the team come back the other way. And the way that they've, their expected goals, 5-on-5 off defending off the rush, they were dead last for a while this season. I think they finished 28th in the league this year. And that is for Valaket, when he looks at the historical data, if you're bottom 5 in the league in that category, you're usually not in the playoffs. So it's a pretty big measure of how well you defend, how well you possess the puck, how well your structure holds up when you turn the puck over. So that, if there's one thing that's a little worrisome, I don't think that's a thing that's going to bite them against the Caps. The Caps don't play with a lot of speed. Their high-end players are mostly older guys. They have a lot of plumbers, a lot of good depth guys that you've never really heard of, guys that came up through their system through Hershey, which is one of the best, if not the best, AHL programs in the league. And they've got a guy in Spencer Carberry who spent a lot of time in the coaching in the AHL and coaches that system really well. But I think the Caps are a little bit more like the Islanders. They like to absorb a lot of things and try to be opportunistic. They're not going to kill you with speed. They're not going to attack you and put you back on your heels. They're going to wait for you to make a mistake, try to get up the ice, try to score a goal, and then shell it back up, trap it back up, try to frustrate a high-end skilled team like the Rangers. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think they have the horses for it. They seem to have some injury problems on the back end that makes it even worse for them. Charlie Lindgren playing against his brother is a great story, but I don't know if that's going to hold up over a 7-game series. I think as you get further on, this issue of defending against the rush, defending in transition for the Rangers could crop up. Carolina is such an aggressive team. They play man-to-man all over the ice. They're going to try to force you into turnovers. They're going to try to force you into retrievals in your own end. That's where I think the Rangers could run into some problems. I think the Bruins can hurt you that way too. Florida has some really good high-end players. So if there's an area to be concerned about with the Rangers, I think it's that. I think if you look at some of their other areas, special teams have been exceptional this year. I think their penalty kill, them and Carolina have been kind of the class of the league this season. Both of them really aggressive penalty kills. I think you saw in that Islander game where the Islanders were missing Noah Dobson. The Rangers, I think they outchanced them 4-on-5, which is not something you see very often, and it's really emblematic of how good the Rangers penalty kill can be and how well it's been operating this year. So I think special teams, they're always going to have an advantage no matter who they play in the playoffs. But like you said, 5-on-5, it's been a struggle. And, I think you look back maybe to those middle 2 months of the season, November, December, January, where they were a 500 team. I think the reason they were a 500 team was they weren't outscoring their problems like they've been doing the last few months. And they weren't getting the goaltending that they needed. Jonathan Quick was good, but not good enough. And Shesterkin was struggling a little bit then. So they have the goalies to erase some of these issues at 5-on-5, but if they're not getting the saves, which is what we saw happen in the playoffs last year, then things start to break down. I'm curious to see. Peter Laviolette is a very detail-oriented guy. He's got a great staff. Dan Muse, Michael Pekka, Phil Housley, especially I think Muse and Pekka have been really helpful as guys who haven't worked a ton with Laviolette and haven't been with many other teams. Pekka's first time in the NHL as an assistant. So I think they have this coaching staff to make those adjustments if things start to crumble a little bit. But it is a little worrisome to see that they've kind of bobbed along at that, at the bottom of the league, defending off the rush at 5-on-5.
Now we talk about team and structural problems potentially, but I think there's one guy that can, if anything, make this a more competitive and energized series on the Capital side of things. And I think it's the elephant in the room. Now, you mentioned right before we hopped on that you started covering the Rangers the season after Tom Wilson's meltdown at the Garden. So, Arthur, I know this has to be one of those topics that is brought up. I don't know actually I don't think we've ever talked about that whole incident or what your thoughts were, but what do you think his role is in this series?
It's interesting. I think what the Rangers are going to try to do, they're obviously not going to say it, but I think Tom Wilson is an incredibly important guy to this Washington group right now. He's arguably their second or third most important forward. He plays a lot of minutes. He's, to his credit, to the credit of some of the coaches he's had, especially Barry Trotz, who was kind of the guy that he had that, kind of built him up and said, you're not just a thug, you can be a real NHL player. And now he's one of their penalty killers. He's a guy who can produce for them. For a team that, like we said, their kind of core is getting up there in age. He's not quite there yet. So he's too important to get distracted to the sideshow. And I think the job of guys like Matt Rempe, of Barkley Goodrow, of Jimmy Vesey, of Vincent Trocheck, maybe Trocheck a little bit less because the Rangers need that line operating at peak efficiency. But you're going to see the Rangers try to goad him into some stuff, I think, for sure. And it's, I think maybe the common sense theory is, well, it's Tom Wilson. He's going to go to other people into stuff. But the Caps are just really bereft of genuine skill up front, like the kind that he can bring. So I think it's going to be the reverse. I think the Rangers are going to be content with their skill guys, and I think the rest of the time they're going to be cross-checking him in the hip after the whistle, grabbing some jerseys, trying to do some stuff to get him off his game because his game is important to what the Caps do. So we were joking around with Artemi Panarin this morning, saying first shift line brawl, and kind of somebody asked him about Tom Wilson. He's like, nah, not my job anymore. So we'll see what happens. But to my mind, I think knowing the way that Peter Laviolette's teams play in the playoffs, knowing what the Rangers have tried to do in terms of asserting themselves physically, and how important Tom Wilson is to what the Caps are going to try to do to be successful in this series, I think he's going to try to ignore the noise, and the Rangers are going to try to create some noise around him.
Oh, a little narrative reversal. I like that, Arthur.
Now, you just mentioned Matt Rempe. How do you think the Rangers will utilize him in this Cap series?
I think he's going to be out there to kind of do what we think Tom Wilson is going to do. He's going to be a guy to throw some big hits, make the most of his minutes, disrupt some shifts. I think the Rangers, like I was saying, the Caps aren't a big puck possession team. They aren't a big offensive force team. They're not a fast team. What they try to do is just slow you down and frustrate you. And I think a guy like Matt Rempe, when the puck gets dumped in, his job is going to be to disrupt the Caps, to try to get them out of their structure, to get them less comfortable. He's not going to get a ton of playing time. It's just not where he's at in his career right now. And if he does play, his job is going to be the first guy in on the forecheck, cause some chaos, get off the ice. And if he can do that, he'll stay in the lineup, and that'll be his ticket to playing more in this series. I think it does seem like he's going to play game one. I don't think his job is going to be to drop the gloves and chase people around. I hope that, I'm sure that's what he's told by the coaching staff, but he has to be able to, still a young guy. I'm sure the adrenaline's going to be through the roof for him for his first playoff game. So it's just a matter of controlling his emotions and reminding himself that he's there to do a job, and the job involves the hockey part of the game, not the nonsense part of the game. But if there is some nonsense, certainly that's the guy you want out there. And if Tom Wilson, the game gets out of hand, and Caps games have gotten out of hand with amazing regularity, given their, minus 37, minus 38 goal differential. When they lose big. So those are the games that could turn into the circus. That's probably when you also want Matt Rempe out there to be able to take care of some problems on the ice.
Yeah. Now, to shift over to the next series, you're covering Islanders, Canes. What are some key things in that series that you're looking for?
It's going to be lopsided in terms of shots and possession and chances. It's the way Carolina plays. The Islanders, when they're at their best in the last 5-6 years, they're able to absorb a lot of opponents' puck possession. They're able to keep the play in front of them. They're able to keep people out of the dangerous areas. I was talking to an assistant coach in the East who's, coached against both teams an awful lot the last few years. And he was saying if the Islanders can get to the middle of the ice in the offensive zone, Carolina's defense is exceptionally good and exceptionally aggressive, but they don't always defend as capably as you'd think they would for a team that operates that well. They just have the puck so much. You regularly see them with 70, 80, even 90 shot attempts a game. So I'm curious to see if the Islanders can get into the interior on them, and really, you look back at the playoff series last year between these two teams. The Islanders came in, they kind of same thing as this year. They barely squeaked in the last couple games, last couple of days of the regular season. They played the last month of the year month of the regular season without Matthew Barzal, who came back in game one, but clearly wasn't 100%. And even at that, Carolina still being Carolina. It's a 4-2 series, 2 overtime wins for Carolina on a couple of fluke goes, and there were a couple other ones that, guys that Carolina banked pucks in off Ilya Sorokin's mask. It wasn't a dominating performance by Carolina in that series. And I think the Island, Carolina has added Jake Gensel. I think they have a little bit more firepower. They're healthy now. But I think the Islanders are better too. It doesn't look like it with the way they played and how they went through the whole season. But they've got a healthy Barzal. They've got a full year of Bo Horvat. Kyle Palmieri and Brock Nelson are 2 30-goal scorers on their second line. They've got that same fourth line that can still grind away. They've got a power play hasn't been good the last month or so, but has been decent throughout the year. And seeing Semyon Varlamov play the way that he's played, this is a guy that did lead them to the semifinals back-to-back seasons in net. He's 36 years old, but I have a feeling he's going to start game 1 on Saturday, and that'll be pretty telling. If he puts up another good performance like he's put up mostly this last month, this series could go a little bit longer than people think.
Sorry, guys. We're going to chalk that one up to tech issues. Listen, Arthur, we talked about Curb. My life is a comedy too sometimes. But I wanted to know, because I was around very briefly to be around Philip Hedl. And we saw today, blue jersey. The conversation was about the long-term health of the player. He's only a few years older than Steve and I. So it seemed that the conversation was more about life outside of hockey, and he's already back practicing. So is there anything from the practice today?
He's out there, and I think that they kept that under wraps pretty well. I had heard when he was shut down for the year and he left to go home a couple weeks after that to the Czech Republic, it wasn't a situation where the Rangers, it seemed more a situation of the Rangers saying, we can't risk this. You don't need to risk this. You're a guy for the long haul. We want to make sure that you're healthy. I think Philip Hedl felt okay then, and he felt like, from what I understood, he wasn't questioning the Rangers' decision. I think he just felt like, I could give this a try if we could make it work. So I think there was something maybe in the back of everybody's mind that get to the end of the regular season. Clearly they needed his long-term injured reserve cap space, but get to the end of the regular season. If he feels well enough, he comes back to New York, does some on-ice workouts, some off-ice workouts on his own, gets through that. And I think then they kind of said, well, let's just leave the door open. So here he is skating. He clearly feels okay. There's no hesitation. There really wasn't when he was ramping back up either. And then he had that horrible setback when he was skating pretty much, with just a couple of extra guys at the Garden before a game a few months ago. But, this is something that he wants. I think the Rangers have been the ones that have been the most cautious. And I don't know that you're going to see him at all in the first round. This is a guy who's basically had these 3 practices this week, and that's been it since November. So not, it's almost like he's coming back from knee surgery or a broken bone or something, where you just like, conditioning is a huge part of this. But it is encouraging. And even if he's not able to play at all in these playoffs, I think it's a guy that is a very popular guy in the room. He's been here a long time now, 7 years. He has an incredible attitude. He's just an upbeat, positive guy. So I think it's more not just for him, because I think he was struggling pretty mightily with the after effects, not just of the concussion the first few months after the hit when he got hurt, but I think the side effects of having a concussion, the difficulty kind of socializing and being around his teammates, and I think it's in every pro sport, guys that are hurt, especially for a long time, you don't spend a lot of time around your teammates. It's just not the way it works, and that can be difficult to deal with emotionally, mentally. So I think this is good for him. It's good for his teammates, and if there's a real chance that he can play, it's good for the Rangers, because with the way that they're constructed, the Rangers have tried a lot of guys on that top line with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. It's Jack Roslovic now. Results have been mixed. I don't think they had any illusions that Roslovic was going to be a big impact player there. They didn't spend a whole lot to get him, and I don't think there was a lot of competition to try to get him at the trade deadline. But I think putting Hedl in that lineup can change things around, whether he plays on the third line in the middle and moves Alexander Wenberg down to a much more effective fourth line, whether he slots in on the left side on that third line, and then Will Cooley moves up to the first line, whether Will Cooley can slot down on the fourth line, or whether it's Filipino playing on the top line on the wing, where he's not really like making himself vulnerable in the open ice, even though that's really the place that he operates the best. It's a lot more options than they've had. So I think there's a lot of positives, even if we don't see him play another game this year.
Well,
Last question I got for you here. This is a fun one. I'm curious. I want to hear your opinion. Is there any team you like out in the West, or anybody you think that's going to be a tough outing?
I mean, the way this year has gone, to my mind, the best teams are in the West. I don't have a lot of faith in Vancouver to go for the long haul. My preseason pick to win a Stanley Cup was Dallas. I'm sticking with that. I think they're the kind of team that has the combination of scoring and defensive ability that they've really shown, and the goaltending has been exceptional, especially of late. I think Winnipeg and Colorado are both really capable teams. Winnipeg certainly got the goaltending to go far. Colorado's got incredible skill. So yeah, I think there are a lot of teams. Obviously, when you get to the finals, if you're the Rangers and you get that far, you have to feel good about your chances. But I feel like whoever gets out of the West probably going to be pretty, maybe a little bit more battle tested than whoever gets out of the East.
Well, Arthur, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it. I always found you were very good to me, and safe travels. I think you're actually I'm not traveling at all, but I do think you're fortunate you're not covering that Nashville-Vancouver series. First thing I said to my dad I was like, man, that is a hike of a travel for a quarterfinal series.
Yeah, two great cities though, so almost worth it once you finally get there. But I'll take Elmont and Raleigh for the first round anyway.
Well, safe travels. I know you got a flight coming up, so we're going to let you off the hook here, Arthur. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, guys. Anytime.
All right, Steve. So what shocked me about that conversation with the guy, the GOAT, Arthur, was Tom Wilson. Everything I've been chalking up, I've been friggin' scribing for Blue Line Station, is that I had a feeling that Matt Rempe is going to start at some point in this series, whether it's game one to send a message or to respond, because I think Ovechkin and Wilson are going to feast on the Rangers. Like, I think they're really going to bring the physical play. Now, with that, does this series, could it be the first time we see a sweep? You and I have never lived to see a sweep in Ranger history. Actually, we were first grade. I think the Thrashers they swept, Yager year, the Yager 123-point year. Other than that, though, like, I wasn't really watching when I was that age. So I know we're aging ourselves a little bit. Whoa. But like 2014, 15, it's always been a grind. Could this be the first year? I brought it up. Look, Record brought it up on Blue Crew. Could this be the first year we see a sweep?
I don't know. I don't think I could give you. I don't like giving predictions like that. You know me. Listen, I would love a sweep. I think we've been saying it. We need a sweep. I think that'd be really awesome for us, especially if we already get past the first round. I think we're going to be getting our next two series for sure. If we get that far, will be tough. We know they're going to be tough, which is why we need that one. So I'm not going to rule on a sweep, but I definitely would say you look at all the pieces. You got to say that the Washington Capitals are in a heavy mismatch here, and they're going to rely on a few guys. It's going to be Ovi, Carlson, Oshie, and Tom Wilson, the usual crew, Chives, nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the guys that Washington's going to look to turn to, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Rempe out there starting game one. Now, if the Rangers were to, for some reason, hopefully no one gets to this point, but if they were to go down in the series, I would not expect Rempe to start. I don't think that's been the Rangers' recipe ever since Rempe has established himself. And you see it, you saw it in that Islander game that we were down. We saw it in the other Islander game where we were down before we tied it. You saw it in the Flyer game. You saw it in these games when the Rangers are down. Rempe does not get any ice time. It's only when we get a lead, then we're sending him out there. But for game one to send a message, I agree with what Arthur had to say. I would put Rempe out there, and I think what Arthur had to say, I think we will see Laviolette line up the lineup accordingly. I thought he made a great point on. He mentioned Galan. What do you think? What do you think Galan is thinking right now? I was thinking that the other day.
So everything that's coming out now, it seems like Brooks and Arthur actually have all their material as of late at the Athletic and the New York Post. They both have alluded to situations that have occurred or conversations that happen. I'll be honest though, I think I'm a glass half full guy. I see the best in everybody. Sometimes until it's not at a point where you can't. I said it about Dave Quinn. I thought there was a lot on Quinn's plate that was out of his hands, out of anybody's hands. I think if you hire Jim Montgomery in that situation, maybe you don't fire him, but it's still not as good of a season, right? 2021. 22, Gallant coached his team to one of the best seasons in franchise history, and they go all the way to game 6 of the conference final. The second year, there's plenty that you could dissect, but yeah, I think it's interesting because we saw Brooks come out with a piece a little while ago. I know Arthur's written too about it. Like it did not end well, which I think it was a little bit of a shock that Gallant was ushered out last season, but now everything that's coming out makes sense, right? You're seeing how Laviolette's gotten to Lafreniere and Panarin, and they were the two most important guys that the Rangers needed. They are the most, I would say they're probably two of the most important forwards going into the playoffs for this team.
Now, there was one thing that Arthur mentioned that I thought was interesting. He was talking about the lines. And I do agree with him that Roslovic hasn't jumped out at you on that first line. I thought final game of the season, I thought was huge to get him on the board. I thought that was very important. But he mentioned moving Will Cooley up to the first line. I would not be a fan of that. I'm curious to see. I'll pitch it over to you in a second to see if you agree with that. But I would not want Will Cooley going on the first line with Kreider and Zibanejad. For me, and we could go back to the whole role discussion, but these last 2 weeks, Will Cooley is just a player that has no pop to him. There were a couple opportunities where he got. I'm not talking about the physicality. He's got that. He leads the league in rookie hits. But there were a couple opportunities where he was given giveaway opportunities, and he would have let a breakaway, and he completely died. Defenders caught up to him, overran him, and took the puck from him. So he doesn't jump out to you as someone that's gonna, as somebody that could skate fast, move the puck around. To me, that's not Cooley's role. So for me, I don't see him on the first line. Particularly, what do you think?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too, but I think you can't rule out line adjustments in the postseason. Like, Roslovic, I think if something's not a sure yes or no, it's in the conversation. And I don't think Roslovic's put himself in a position that you say he's just the first line right wing. I think if the team needs to make adjustments, you have to look at what assets you can put in that spot. And I think Will Cooley's a viable option. I do. Is it the most ideal? No. We both know that. We've been talking about all year. But at the same time, I do think it's kind of matchup based. And the key to a really good coaching staff, and this is a really good coaching staff, is not only making the in-game adjustments, but having a pulse on matchups, right? And quickly assessing that. I think Will Cooley in some instances could be a very good player for a matchup-based situation. Granted, do you want him going up against Carolina's first line? I don't know. But then again, you have to get to that series and see, are the Rangers matching Panarin's line against the Gensel line? There's a lot of factors that play into that. So we could dive into it, the hypotheticals. I just think the idea shouldn't be that we shouldn't be shutting the door and locking it on the idea, for sure.
I 100% agree with you. I think, and we're most likely going to see some line shuffles at some point in the playoffs. I'd be shocked if you saw Will Cooley on that first line, though. I think there's more routes you could go. All right, Chaz, before we wrap up, let's both give one key to our matchup. Rangers, Capitals. You want to start off or you want me to go first? One key to the playoff series. What do you think?
I'll start because I got this on lock. It's
Oh,
Charlie
okay.
Lindgren. All right, so
Ooh.
Darcy Kemper played the first 2 months, 3 months, splitting starts. March comes, Charlie Lindgren is starting every game. And Darcy Kemper played 2 games since February, 3 games since February. So I think they brought in this guy, some money bags. They said, we're going to try and extend our contention window with Kemper. We have an aging core. We're going to try and see how long we can push it. We have Ovi under contract again to reach that record, but also listen, they're in the playoffs. That's a shot at the Stanley Cup, right? You're one of 16. So with that, I think they bring in Kemper, who just won a Stanley Cup. He's not playing well. I mean, sub 900 save percentage over 2 seasons, more losses than wins. Not a good situation. Ryan Lindgren's brother Charlie. The Rangers faced him 3 times. He's 2-1-0, has a shutout, phenomenal save percentage. I think Charlie Lindgren's going to be the key. The Rangers cannot let Charlie Lindgren get hot through the first few games. With home ice advantage, you just can't go on the road and let a goaltender get hot. It harkens a little bit back to the Braden Holtby situation in 2012. Not the same, but listen, Lindgren's not young. He's 30, but he's getting his NHL shot. You don't want a goalie getting his NHL shot to get hot, especially in that first round when kind of anything can happen. You don't want to be playing from behind. And I think if there's one player that can really stifle the Rangers, you could talk about Ovechkin's goal scoring, but he can't do it alone. You could talk about Wilson and Ovechkin's aggression and physical play. That can't take over a game now, especially with how the Rangers have built their depth. I think Charlie Lindgren, he can be the player that gives the Rangers the most trouble, because if he can allow them to hang in a game, anything's possible. So I'm going to say that's the X factor. Steve-O pitching it back. What's the key?
I think I gave you 2 keys. I do agree with you. One of them's kind of connected to Charlie Lindgren as a whole. You can't allow him to get hot. I do agree with that. But we can't allow bad opportunities. And Arthur mentioned opportunities off the rush. And I think this is something the Rangers have kind of been faulty here at, especially you could chalk it in as just carelessness, sloppiness. I don't know. You could just categorize it under one boat. But how many times have we seen in the last week here? We saw it in the Philly game. You saw it in the Islander game. You saw the opposing team scoring with under a minute left in the period. And I don't know if that's just, I mean, it doesn't seem like players are gassed. It just seems like, there's 20 seconds left. Like, you know what I mean? So that's something we can't allow, because if Charlie Lindgren is shutting us out in a period and then Ovi buries one with 10 seconds left in a period, that's momentum that a team, a bottom feeder like the Washington Capitals, could take and utilize to their advantage, especially if we're transitioning, going from New York to Washington. So that is something we have to avoid. And I'll give you 2 X factors from the Rangers. My number 1 is Igor Shesterkin. I think him alone, he's arguably one of, I don't want to say the best, but one of the best goalies in the playoffs. So I'm fairly confident around him. I think he's playing his best hockey of the year. You know, there was a good week or 2 where he was really struggling, but he looks really good and he looks locked in, and he has the power. Really, if the Rangers for some reason aren't clicking whatsoever, he has the power to lock in and change momentum. And that is something that will be big. Maybe not in this series, but if the Rangers are to advance, that's something to watch. And then I'll give you Panarin, Chives, of course. I'll give you that Saturday matinee game against the Islanders. That felt like a playoff game. And Panarin for 2 periods and a half was the complete no-show. So you saw that glimpse of playoff hockey, Panarin, what's going to happen. I like Panarin's matchup against Washington, but we'll see if Panarin, this is the big question with him. We know that he could struggle sometimes in the playoffs. The ice shrinks. You can't really do, like Arthur mentioned, the Harlem Globetrotters passing.
Haha.
So will he come to the playoffs? Will he bring that same MVP caliber? That all remains to be seen. So I'll give you Igor and Panarin. All quality questions, though, Chavs.
Yeah, I think there's never a doubt in the fans. Jalen Brunson just wrote a piece for the Players Tribune. Adam Fox did the same thing last year. So great to see, Knicks, the energy in New York's phenomenal. As he mentioned, the Islanders are in the playoffs. Like, it's the region right now is really kicking in terms of all sports. Now, what you mentioned though, I think back to that Pittsburgh series. Panarin had 3 goals. Obviously goes to game 7, a little bit of a different series, and I think the Penguins are a different team for whatever reason. It's like I think that if the Penguins got in, they could still be better than some of the playoff teams were this year. It's just in their DNA, right?
If they kept Jake Gensel, are they
Whoa.
sneaking in? Are they sneaking
Oh,
in?
yeah, 100%. It's not even a question. Not even a question. All right, so we're moving forward because, listen, Penguins kept Jake Gensel. I don't even think they were to come down to the wire. I think they would have won like 6 or 7 in a row. Seriously.
I agree with you.
He's on Sidney Crosby's wing. There's no doubt. Yeah, I think the Penguins actually become a little more. I think they enter that Tampa echelon where it's like, they're the wild card, but they're just like any other team that's in the playoffs.
Yeah. All right, before we wrap up, I'll also pitch you one last thing as well. I keep adding, but it's playoff time. How can we not talk about these things? Our passion's there. Are there any other playoff matchups here in round 1 that you have your eye on? You have circled on your bracket. What do you got here?
Oh, all of them? So the
is
East
there
is
one matchup in particular? Holy.
All right, well, we'll say, listen, Battle of Florida is going to be tooth and nails. Very excited for that. The last few years they've had that, and I do think it's legitimately a rivalry that's brewing. I think after this playoff series, it's bar none, no doubt, one of the best in the NHL. It's certainly at its peak too. Florida just went to the Cup final, right? I mean, just ready for that. I also think Boston, Toronto again is going to be interesting. I like both Nashville and Vancouver, so seeing those 2 teams go at it will be fun. I think there's a few standouts that I'm excited for. But Steve-O, is there one series you're going to keep an eye on?
Yeah, you already know that I'm looking at, you mentioned that Boston-Toronto game. That is going to be, I think that's going to be a good series. I think that has the potential to go the distance. I think that's going to be a good one. And then to jump out to the West, I really do think that Winnipeg and Colorado is going to be a good one as well. Again, I'm telling you, don't sleep on Winnipeg. But if there's one team you don't want to play the first round, if you're Winnipeg, it's Colorado. So I think that's another series that the Stars, the Oilers, the Knights, whoever it is, any team that could have a first quick round in the West, I think they're at an advantage because I do think Avs or Winnipeg, whoever it is, I think that will go the distance. I think in my mind 6 or 7 games for sure. I don't see a scenario where Hullebuck is getting blown out or these games are uncompetitive. So that whoever comes out of that series, Winnipeg and Colorado, is going to be drained. So that is something to watch as the playoffs go on, Chavs.
Yeah, Puck Empire has Winnipeg winning in 7. That would be huge. Colorado wins the Stanley Cup and then 2 years in a row is out in a game 7. Round 1, nuts. I think, we say keep an eye on you. We both know we're watching all these games. And obviously I think for our listeners' sake, find a bar, find a multi-screen, get the game on your laptop, phone, and the TV. Like, this year is a really special first round. I'm more excited, I think, for this year than I have been for the last few years.
Yeah, and I think it just brings, it's like last year was just some different circumstances. Like, again, I don't know, maybe it's because we won the President's Trophy. Who knows? But to your point, what I love is that Saturday you flip on a game, you could watch Islanders Hurricanes, then you go right into Maple Leafs Bruins, and then there's probably going to be a West game on at nighttime. So 11 o'clock, what's going on? Pop on a game. I love that. So all that will be remain to seen. That'll wrap us up here on this episode of Puck Talk CS. Rangers Capitals round 1 Sunday at 3 p.m. Of course, stay tuned to all of our socials, Puck Talk CS, Instagram, YouTube, website. We will, of course, be pounding out content as the playoffs progress. Always remember, it's just the luck of the puck.